Welcome to Crit Hit Interviews. I'm Shrimp, and today I'm joined by Arlian.
Hey there.
And Lovie.
Hello.
And today we're interviewing Colin Horgan from Melessthanthree. How you doing?
Hi, I'm Colin.
For those of you who don't know Colin, he's the lead developer for Ectoplaza, a level designer and developer for Uncharted Fortune Hunter, and he's working on a new game called Lucah. But before we get into Lucah, we want to ask a few things that are more personal. You recommended developers exercise, read books, and just sort of get their mind off the game for a bit. What would be your favorite book or a book you would recommend to others?
So this is kind of unfortunate in that I don't really have a book I can point to as like a clear favorite or whatever. But like I have some writers who definitely like influenced the kind of stuff I do and are like ones I enjoy reading. Like Philip K. Dick is a popular one that I like because the whole like the psychedelic sci-fi thing. But I also really enjoy Kathy Acker, who was I'm not sure if punk is the right word, but that's the kind of vibe I get from her novels that were like weird postmodern feminist works from like the 80s. And also Jorge Luis Borges has had a lot of influence. The Argentinian writer for his short stories and poems. Yeah, that's kind of like my basic reading list. If I could recommend any of those, it's definitely Borges, because he's had like a ton of influence on like geek media and culture, and like basically invented like metafiction and postmodernism. It's cool stuff.
You definitely make it sound interesting.
I'm sort of loosely familiar with Jorge's and more familiar with Philip K. Dick because, like, do androids dream of electric sheep?
Right.
No, the Blade Runner did.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. It just makes me giggle.
Oh, I mean, fair enough. Which
Because
so different.
I think of other things.
I think all the stuff I just mentioned is like fiction works, but I also make sure to read a lot of, just because it's the space I occupy, I read a lot of like games writing, like specifically games criticism and works that analyze or talk about various aspects of games, the games industry. Not only because it's important to what I'm doing, but you can find inspiration or different ways of thinking about things by reading criticism. So there's that too.
Anyone specific that you follow more in that genre of literature?
I could probably name like some of the bigger websites that I check off in like Waypoint or whatever. But I guess like I like to champion this smaller blog called Fextro. I was on one of their podcasts last year. They do some really insightful crit, usually like weekly or bi-weekly, about like really tiny games, like the kind of stuff you'd find like with like 5 downloads on itch.io or something like that. So I would definitely recommend them. They deserve a bigger readership. And I also obviously really enjoy the crit hit reviews and videos, and that's why I'm excited to be here. So yeah.
Well, we heard that this is your first Kickstarter-funded project, right?
Yes.
So what has been your experience with Kickstarter compared to what you've expected going on?
Kickstarter was like definitely a interesting and huge experience. I didn't really know what I was stepping into. I mean, I thought I did because I did a bunch of research and stuff looking at Kickstarters that I liked or that I thought would be good models for what I was trying to do. But all the work I did beforehand was important, like figuring out how to put the page together and to make it look attractive to the kind of people who would donate to game Kickstarters, making sure there was a demo that people could play, all that kind of stuff. But the actual process of running a Kickstarter, I'd heard it be described as like it's a full-time commitment, and I like half expected that, but I didn't realize what exactly that would mean. And once I actually launched, I realized that like what it meant was doing all this engagement on social media, responding to emails and sending out press emails, trying to get people to look at the project and responding to comments and questions and putting up updates like every 2 or 3 days to make sure that people knew that you were invested. It was just like a ton of stuff that is totally divorced from like just the very process of making a game, which is the thing that I consider myself like to do the most. And there's also this weird psychological aspect. Well, I guess it's not weird, it should be expected, where you have these peaks, right, in a campaign. It's like right at the beginning because it's exciting and new. And then right at the end, because everyone's like, you know, rushing to try to make the project successful. But then there's this whole block in the middle where there's like not a lot of reason to talk about the Kickstarter or to get excitement for it. So any little like dip or curve that happens there can be really like impactful on your mental state or your feeling of success for the project. Like we ran into this like issue that I'd never heard about other people having before, where we'd get donors who would like put in a pretty large amount, like they would pledge $1,000, and for a project that was aiming for 20,000, like a single thousand was a huge boost, right? I mean, I guess it would be for any project. And it would be super exciting, you know. I'd wake up and get like a notification and be like, wow, you're another $1,000 closer. Like we just jumped up, you know, whatever percentage that would be. You see that bar fill up a bit more on the page. And you're like, yeah, this is great. And then like a day or two later, the same person would drop the pledge. And I'm just like, what's the point of that? Like, are these people doing that for fun or something? Like if it was just one example,
Pretty rude.
yeah, if it was just one example, I would think like, oh, they just, you know, like realized they overcommitted or like that was a lot of money or something like that. But there was like 3 or 4 separate people, like one person who did it twice.
What?
Who submit a pledge and then drop it the next day or 2 days later. So it made me really paranoid even after we had hit our like campaign goal, which was like 3 days before the end of the campaign. That I thought like, we're still not out of the clear. I still want to make like an extra couple thousand just in case some of those drop. And one of them did, but thankfully it wasn't enough to bring it back under. And Kickstarter has some like vague rules about dropping pledges in the last 48 hours, so stuff like that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was like the like most unexpected and honestly like the toughest part of it, especially because I remember there was one specific point where it was like only a week and a half left and that happened and we'd still had like $7,000 to go. And it just like, I felt crushed that whole day when that happened. And I still had to like, you know, make sure I was sending out the emails and getting people's eyeballs on the game and making Twitter posts and all that stuff. And it's hard to do that when you feel like you're just not going to succeed, even though, you know, it's not indicative of like your future success that there's like one troll who's doing something like that.
Yeah.
At least I'm pretty sure it was a troll, you know. So yeah, that's my weird Kickstarter story. But really, like, it was kind of amazing once we succeeded, and even just seeing like all the support leading up to that, because, you know, like our following grew, which was great. But also like just the feeling that like 500 strangers on the internet decided that my work was worth like putting their money behind was a huge like boost to morale. And even like the week after the Kickstarter ended, I had gotten like one day where I got 3 like bad news emails in a row about like various like business or game related things about the project, and I was still like I just felt so unstoppable that it didn't even affect me, which was really cool. That glow is kind of, you know, faded over time, but I still look back to it whenever I feel like I really need that little boost, you know. So yeah, it's a good experience, and it helped fund the game, so that's a plus too.
All right, so how did you find the team that you formed for Lucah?
So Lucah started as a solo project with, you know, I was doing the art design and programming, and while I was doing that, this was like early prototype stages. One of my longtime friends and like someone I'd collaborated with in the past was started a SoundCloud page to put up some music that he was working on in his spare time. And I was listening to it, and I was like, oh, this seems really cool, and like, I'm glad you're doing music again. Would you want to maybe do music for this game? And so that's how Nicola Teleska, our composer, came onto the project, and he's been a really valuable collaborator since, especially because I'll often like bounce design or story ideas off him, like the kind of stuff that I can't just talk about to the world. Kind of goes to him for feedback. So like him and I are kind of the core, like always been working on the project for most of its lifetime. I also had my friend Kevin Wong, who was a lead on a game called Chambara, which you might have heard of. It was like released on PlayStation 4 and came out on Steam rather recently. It's like a multiplayer first-person stealth game where you're like everything was 2 colors and all the characters were one color or the other. Yeah. So you would blend into your environment. It's pretty cool.
Screen cheat?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like screen cheat, but controversial, biased opinion, I think it's a lot better than screen cheat because you don't have to screen cheat, but you can screen cheat if you want. And there's even a mechanic in the game that stops people from screen cheating because you can close your character's eyes, which is
great.
Neat. But anyways, that's a little diversion. But he had a lot of experience from that project doing like production and press outreach and stuff like that. So I brought him on to help me run the Kickstarter campaign back when that was going. And there'll be an update about this now, but as we're wrapping up to release, I've also brought him back onto the project as a producer to like handle all the like release related stuff that's not directly connected to making the game. So that's exciting. And then I also brought my friend Brianna Lay on to do specifically the key art for the project. So anything that would be like outside of the art in the game itself, which I was doing. This like a more traditional thing to try to be like the face of the Kickstarter campaign or whatever. And that's how we got the header art. Or like the cover art for the campaign. And she is now known for being the developer behind Butterfly Soup, which came out towards the end of last year. And it's gotten a good amount of word of mouth and IGF nominations, so that's cool. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that's everyone who's directly credited in the game. Of course, I have a bunch of friends who have encouraged me and given me feedback and stuff like that, and they're all important too. But yeah, that's kind of where Lucah is coming from.
Is there anything you'd like to share with people who haven't been following the development of Lucah?
I guess I'd want them to just know what Lucah is and why I think it's cool. So the tagline I use for Lucah is, Lucah is a nightmare action RPG about finding oneself. It's, a 2D top-down, like Zelda-like kind of style with a really unconventional aesthetic, I'd say, where everything's high contrast, black, and like simple outlines for the characters in the world. Everything moves and has a almost sketchy look to it. It kind of feels like, or at least what I hope it feels like, is this sort of anxiety portrayed right on the screen. And it's like simultaneously a weird artsy dream diary sort of experience while also being a super technical action game developed by a super small team. And all those things I think are super unique, especially the kind of project we're creating in this space. Like we almost have this weird disconnect where it's like too artsy for the typical game, but like too gamey for your typical art game. And I think that's like really cool, actually. And I wish there was a lot more stuff like that would get popular, or because I love those kind of like vignette-y and personal small experiences, but I also like, sick ass combos and junk like that. So I kind of wanted to put those together, maybe inspire people in the future to do something similar. It's coming out sometime this year. I can't confirm exactly when, during the summer or a bit after that. and you can play a demo of it right now. Melessthanthree.itch.io/Lucah. Hopefully all this stuff is linked when we put this up. Yeah. But I definitely encourage people to try it because it'll be like about half an hour, and I assure you, getting it in front of people has been the best way to kind of show like how special I think the project is. So yeah, that was my long-winded answer about introducing the game to people.
I got to play the demo, and I'm a fan of like a lot of action RPGs. Are there any particular game mechanics that you're implementing that you feel particularly proud of or noteworthy?
Yeah. So one mechanic that I think makes the game stand out, partially because it's such a like departure from the sort of expectation people have from these kind of games, is the rewind, which is introduced super early on. Instead of like a traditional healing item, the character is given these items called rewinds that let you rewind a fight that you're in. Like it basically resets everything to where it began, so you recover any health you lost while the enemies are back to full health and their starting positions and all that sort of thing. And I always get a ton of questions about that from the playtesters who are like, why is this here instead of a heal or whatever? And there are ways to heal in Lucah, but they're nowhere near as numerous and often like a bit harder to come by. Whereas the rewind is something I wanted to include in that core loop from the beginning, because I think it can kind of act as a heal, because you reset any like damage you've taken during a fight, but it produces a very different psychological effect and makes you put a lot more into the decision making of, should I use this right now? For example, like you'll have questions going through your head where it's like, I've taken a few hits and I might be close to game over, or being sent back to a checkpoint. But I think like this enemy is almost down. Like, can I defeat the enemy before I get hit again? If I rewind now, do I think I can actually play better than I am right now and not get hit as much while also still getting to this point? Or do I think I should just finish the fight with my low HP, but then I'll enter my next fight with low HP, and do I think I can actually survive until I get to the next checkpoint? There's all these things that you have to think about, and ultimately the solution to all of it is just you want to make less mistakes than you did beforehand. And that's kind of that's like a typical arc for these sort of action games, is like you want to play it more so that you can just get better and better at the certain situations you're thrown into and the mechanics you have at play. And the rewind itself just kind of gives you like an opportunity to not only erase the mistakes that you've made, but to practice the skills that you need to get going. And like hopefully it will like gently push people down this path of self-improvement, self-actualization that kind of connects with the world and the themes of Lucah's journey. So that's something I'm like pretty proud of, even though it's not like the most, like it doesn't seem like the most interesting of mechanics right at the beginning, because it's so simple. I'm also really happy with how like the different paradigms shifting and like move sets can like flow into each other, but that's a more typical like action game style that you'll see in games like Bayonetta, which was a big influence on that game and stuff like that. So yeah.
Lovey's just being here like when you mentioned that game. I was just
I love Bayonetta so much.
Oh, good. Bayonetta is one of my favorite games ever.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of the DMC, Bayonetta, Chaos Legion, not so much God of War.
I'm still really mad that Bayonetta 2 is on the other way. You cry.
Oh, I really don't like Bayonetta 2.
Oh, also,
I still want to play it. Like, I've heard people complain about it, but I still want to play it.
To chime in,
I'm sure it's serviceable enough as an action game, but I don't think it got what made the first one really unique.
To chime in on the rewinds, having used them,
yes,
I personally got like a get good message from them, because they're not healing items where you can just walk in, take a slug, run off, heal, and deal with things. That wasn't what they're there for. They're there for, if you got like just smacked around because you didn't know this new enemy, or how to deal with it and just got crippled, you got a fresh chance at going into this thing with a bit more knowledge. They were not a solution to a thing. They were like, they more enabled learning than
exactly
resolving a situation, which I really liked. You walk into a boss fight and get like half pasted, and you are given the tools to do so without being frustrated. One thing I actually forgot to check was, does rewinding reset your experience that you've gained in a given room?
I'm glad you thought about that.
Because if it doesn't, then that gives you the ability to gain more experience on the way towards an area's checkpoint, which gives you a potential farming mechanism without having to backtrack too much.
Yeah, it actually does not reset any experience you've gotten.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you could theoretically use rewind to farm, but I feel like most people either don't realize that or don't feel comfortable enough with the game's combat at the points where they would need to farm to do farming, you know. Like, thankfully, a lot of it was...
rewind the percentage or not?
No, it does not rewind the percentage.
Okay. So that's two things it doesn't rewind, because there's that...
Yeah.
We'll touch on that in another question we have set aside for you.
Right. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up those points about the rewind. Like, that's exactly what I'm going for. And I feel like, you know, usually there's some resistance, you know, not just because, like, the game looks weird, but because it does kind of challenge, like, the player in a way that I feel like most games don't. I mean, these super technical games like Devil May Cry and, you know, even something like Dark Souls sort of demand a certain understanding of the game in order to progress through it. And that's definitely something I'm doing. But I'm hoping that the rewind is, like you said, a sort of invitation to get good, but not as forceful as that sounds, you know? Like, it's an opportunity to learn, which you said, and I really like how you phrased that.
Because a situation can be punishing, but instead of having to come back to it next time, you're given that ability to reset and be like, okay, so there's this, but I can approach it this way without using a health item for those situations where it's just bad, where there's just situations where you're just going to get like a hit in the face.
Right. And you do get health items in the game, but it's like 1 or 2.
I had 2.
Compared to 5 rewinds, you know?
I had 2 by the time I was at the bus area.
I think by the end of the game, there's like 3 total that you can get, and only 1 of them is required to get. So theoretically, you could go through the whole game with just your 1 heal item. And hopefully people, you know, see that as a sign that, like, maybe that's not what you should be focusing on.
It's a nice crutch, though, sometimes.
Yeah. Like, a way to heal was something that was requested for a long time, and it was added in, you know, after the kind of designing for the rewind. But I do think it adds another dimension to the decision-making that's important, especially because it's like, do I use my 1 heal item and, like, think I can win the fight with it? Or, like, you know, if you use it and then you get hit, it's like, if you rewind, you're going to lose that healing you did, and you don't get the heal item back.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's still, like you said, it's kind of a nice little crutch for, like, when you're really close to beating that boss or something and you don't want to rewind all the way.
Yeah, or you're, like, walking around dead as hell with, like, a sliver of health from, like, a couple
years. Yeah.
What is your favorite memory of watching someone play a game or demo you've worked on?
So I'll talk about an experience with Lucah, I think, just because it's what I'm working on right now. But at, like, I think it was the first time I had demoed the game in public, it was like one of the early shows, but it wasn't the first time. It was like right after our Kickstarter succeeded. There were 2... They must have been like, they were kids, like maybe like 10 to 12 years old, came over, tried the demo and really enjoyed it. And then throughout the weekend that the show was going, they kept coming back to try to play the game on the, like, harder and harder difficulties. And, like, the point that demo ended, there was an optional, like, a series of 4 fights in this little hidden arena. And this like, one of the kids came back maybe like 3 separate times to try to beat it. And the thing was, because the demo was set on every play, they had to play through the whole game again just to get to that point, and they did that. So that was like really like a really good sign to me that there was maybe something here that people liked, because this one person was willing to play through the game over and over just to get to a specific challenge and try to overcome it. And she did in the end, which was really cool.
That's adorable.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was especially reaffirming because I don't really think of a game that people would enjoy, so that was good too.
So on that subject, you mentioned that night terrors you've suffered from have been a source of material to explore in Lucah. So are there plans for future games to revisit Lucah's world in a sequel, or are you all out of nightmares to explore?
I mean, I don't think I'm out of inspiration or anything like that as far as that goes. Lucah is intended to be a complete experience, especially because the full game, at least like the way it's coming together, is going to be fairly intense and require a lot out of the player, like to really see everything, like to the point where it's almost like beating the game once won't really be enough in more ways than one. I kind of want to keep that a bit vague, but like once the game comes out and people play it, I think it'll be kind of obvious how that materializes. So I think I'm putting everything that Lucah can possibly be in one game. I also think I've kind of pushed the style of Lucah as it. Like it could definitely be probably polished more, find other interesting avenues to convey its unique world, but Lucah probably won't have any kind of sequel. I thought about the idea of revisiting it in 5 years or some other significant amount of time, and when I'm a bit better of a developer, or maybe after I've branched out to 3D, I think it'd be really interesting to make a 3D beat 'em up in this style. I don't even know how exactly that would materialize, but whatever it is. I also think on a more cynical note, people will probably want to see something from me different, or not the same visual style again. So I'm hoping that once Lucah is done, it's everything that it possibly could have been, and I'll be happy with that.
You've said that Catholicism is a subject that you'd like to explore in Lucah, and I've noticed that there's a lot of religious symbolism. So, what was your inspiration for including that?
So there's a really thoughtful, but the really simple one that I think is probably most likely is just, I really like how creepy all that stuff kind of looks out of context. And, Evangelion is a super popular aesthetic inspiration for a lot of people. And I think part of that is its weird, disconnected take on Christian imagery and that sort of stuff that shows up. Persona 3 is also a game that I enjoy a whole lot and draw some tonal and atmospheric influence from, and that game also used a lot of Christian imagery in its horror, and I just thought that was really compelling. I think part of why I find it compelling is I was raised Roman Catholic, and as that imagery kind of started seeping in to Lucah and just the sort of spaces I was creating, I started to interrogate why that was something that was coming up with me. I think a big part of how that manifested in Lucah's world is it's not directly any specific religion or whatever. I'm trying to make a point in creating Lucah that there's explicit spiritual elements that show up. Everything is abstract and fantastical and all that kind of thing. But any element of religion that's in there is about the structures of religion, or how religion manifests in the world through the people that practice it, rather than the beliefs or the mythologies behind it. And anything that could seem to resemble those sort of supernatural or spiritual elements behind the belief is supposed to be filtered or portrayed through a more psychological lens. This is how these characters manifest this belief in the world and in their practice. The public demo ends in the the area I call the Sanctum, which has like a bunch of these worshippers and a big boss at the end that is, called Messiah. I'm like not being
is it the place where all the dudes
it.
flagellating themselves?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the introduction, like this world and this power structure that, because it's implied that this is like a place of power and wealth, and that kind of dictates how certain things work in the world. You meet with this father-like figure that invites you to become purified or cleansed or whatever it is, because that might lift the curse that you bring upon the world. And it's a figure of authority implementing a belief onto you to try to offer some sort of escape, some sort of like, to use a concept from Roman Catholicism, like original sin sort of thing, that like you as a person are unclean or sinful and deserving of the terrible things that are happening to you. Like, to specifically tie it back to experience, the world of Lucah is like aesthetically represents to me a kind of weaponized Catholic guilt, because that's a lot of like the struggle I had when I didn't exactly belong because of various aspects of like who I am, or have like what kind of things interested me and stuff like that. That like I didn't belong to this kind of belief that I was being put into, and the way that alienation affects you and puts you into various mental or emotional struggles eventually just came out in the world of Lucah. So I think that's what I got out of just realizing these subconscious. There's a lot there, but I hope that people who play the game kind of see it as a more nuanced take, and not just a sort of like, oh wow, like I hate God, let's kill God, like that sort of that a lot of games do. It's a lot more. It's a lot more grounded than that. Is my hope, at least.
So there's a mysterious percentage in the game that you said plays into the ending. Since the game is sort of based on your experiences, what would you say is your percentage right now?
I think I hit 100% 4 months ago. Is my jokey answer. The percentage is an interesting thing, especially when trying to talk about the game before it's out, because it directly deals with something that I don't really want to spoil. But it sort of represents this corruption, or what this world is showing to Lucah, this sort of curse that's been put on a figure like Lucah, the player character, I mean. And as they're exposed more to like the nightmare world and the enemy nightmares, and their influences seep them more, and what exactly that means and how it manifests will like show up with like a specific divergence towards the end of the game, depending on whether you're at 100% or lower than that. But like the one thing that my answer there should hopefully be read at, and like this is like hopefully a intriguing enough hint as to what happens at the end of the game, is that being at 100% isn't necessarily the bad, even though you have to quote unquote fail a lot of times to hit it.
Or just idle forever, because I noticed it also slowly ticks up over time.
Yeah. Something interesting that kind of comes into play later is that I provide a small amount of ways to alter the percentage, which not only means like you can sacrifice a certain thing in order to bring it down, but you can also make it grow faster if you so choose. And that'll be hopefully a cool part of the game to experience. Sorry I can't be more specific, but
so
yeah.
Does that mean we can expect 2 endings, at least out of the initial run
Yes.
through? Okay.
At least. Assuming everything goes according.
Because there's also a new game plus-ish element, at least that was mentioned on the Kickstarter, but it says it's from the perspective of a different character.
Yeah, so that's a planned expansion that will happen later on, where you get to play as the rival character, and their mechanics are substantially different from Lucah, even though it's the same sort of game.
Oh, that little shit.
To provide like, another perspective. It'll be like a short, like maybe like 1 chapter long story that you play through, and I'm excited to get working on that. But there also is plans for a new game plus for Lucah, because I think that sort of thing is important for the kind of game this is. Like the story is almost constructed so that your first playthrough. This goes into a bit about like where this is going to be a game that like someone can really put a lot of themselves into and get a lot with that. The first playthrough is designed to almost be a tutorial for the rest of the game, and then your second playthrough is when the real game starts. Because enemy positions will be mixed. Is like bumped up to be more like what quote unquote I intended as the designer, that sort of thing. And the story and world might even react to you because you're in it again. So I hope people look forward to that.
Okay, no, that's something interesting, and I guess that also makes it easier for like story divergences. Is if there's a new game plus that loops through, you'll have a better idea of things and be able to.
Yeah. But I do intend that, like, hopefully, if someone only just wants to play it, that's totally cool. They'll get a good experience out of it. It's more to like reflect the kind of things in a game like Bayonetta, which we mentioned earlier, where like playing through it once was not enough for me, because like I played through it once and I'm like, okay, I feel like I have a grip on like all the mechanics and I have all these like cool like weapons and moves that I didn't have before. Like I wonder what it'd be like if I just played through the game again, but with all that stuff. And that's the kind of joy that I want to tap into there.
So on that experiential note, Lucah's art style is very unique. Is it something we'll see in your future games, or is it very specific to Lucah?
Yeah, the style that Lucah uses was a style that I've been developing for a bit in projects of mine, mostly because I don't really consider myself an artist. So my way to like get used to making art was to kind of simplify it and do this like sketchy, almost wireframe like style. And then like Lucah is kind of, as I kind of mentioned before, it feels like almost like an endpoint or a conclusion to this kind of exploration. I'm hoping that my next game will not look like Lucah. Not because I don't like how it looks, but just because I want to try something new. And also, I think a lot of what Lucah is kind of sprung out of the art style, and then like the design of the game influenced the art style, and so on. So, unless I'm making Lucah 2, like, I don't think the style will work for whatever I work on.
The re-Lucah name.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I mean, it could have been worse. It could be Lucah 2 leukemia.
Oh no.
You're terrible.
That's
Absolutely terrible.
Lucah 2, the force is not with him.
See, I thought you were gonna go for Electric Boogaloo.
That's the obvious one, though.
Oh, jeez. Alrighty. Onto a bit of a different topic. Sacrament is an optional small episode that fleshes out Lucah. Is there any plans to include this in the main release of the game, for those who might not snoop around the net?
Oh yeah, of course. It's kind of unfortunate that I've gotten telling me like they played Sacrament and didn't realize that it was connected to Lucah, and that's a bad on my part, because I should make that messaging a bit more clear. I mentioned that New Game Plus, or my planned New Game Plus, has some story divergences, and the Sacrament stories are a part of that. They are something that exist in Lucah's world, and you will experience as part of Lucah if you go into that. Yeah.
So, can you provide us some more details then on Sacrament IV? So far, it looks like a very different game from both Sacrament I and Lucah.
Yeah. So Sacrament IV is something I've been teasing. And the thing that I like about it, and that's kind of interesting, is that it has turn-based RPG battles in it. Now, the secret behind it is that a lot of the inner workings of what's going on there is actually just the same system that Sacrament I is working off of, but trying to represent a different sort of game. It will still mostly be a narrative text adventure type thing, but with these quote unquote action set pieces as part of it, with these turn-based battles that are for mostly text dialogue. That's about like that's, I guess, like the biggest secret. It's actually not too different from Sacrament 1, even though it looks very different.
Interesting.
Yeah. So and again, it directly story of Lucah.
Are there any plans for any other sacraments, such as a 2 or 3? And if so, would they also differ in genre?
Yeah, so I'm glad you picked up on that, because that was a part of the reason why I was showing Sacrament 4 instead of something like Sacrament 2 or whatever, because the jump in the numbers implies that there's something that happens like in between. To connect with the sort of like Catholic structure, like Catholic inspired structure that I'm playing with, there are plans for 7 sacraments to match like the 7 sacraments of Roman Catholicism. They won't all be as like in depth or big as Sacrament 1 and 4 are, but again, they will all play a part in Lucah and tie into what's going on in that game's world and story.
So actually with that,
Yeah.
because you're having them coming out of order, do you want people in the future, once they're all out, to play them in the order they were released or the order in which they're numbered?
As a part of Lucah, they will 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The ones that I am like releasing separately are sort of meant to be almost like a little taste of what's to come, and I chose them specifically to do that.
Okay.
I don't see myself releasing all of them as individual projects. There's probably going to be one more, like about a month before the game's release. But the only way I plan right now to experience all of them is to actually play Lucah. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
So you can try the demo for Lucah on itch.io or GameJolt. Be sure to follow at Melessthanthree on Twitter to keep up with Colin, and follow Lucah Game on Tumblr to see some sweet animations. Is there anywhere else you'd like to direct people?
I guess I'd just say, also try out Sacrament 1, which is on my GameJolt and itch.io page, and look out for Sacrament 4, probably coming out right around the video comes out, hopefully.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so thanks for actually popping on the show, Colin. It was highly appreciated.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I was glad I got this opportunity.
It was fun having you.
Good.
And we look forward to hearing and seeing more about Lucah as it continues to, move along in development.
Links to more resources so you can see what Lucah's about and possibly get it for yourself will be in the description below.
As will a link to our Discord.
Because we love it when people join our community.
Did yours microphone go?
Yeah, I heard that too.
Okay.